I had a client come into one of my group classes one evening and tell me, I finally figured out what my dog finds reinforcing. I was like, oh great, what is it? Praise. The dog would work for praise.
I could be a mess, stressed in yesterday. He don't care less, he sees me anyway. Yeah, he sees me anyway. My dog thinks I'm great, he thinks I'm number one. He never hates, even when I'm done.
This episode is brought to you by It Goes Without Saying, and this is a presentation that I'm offering on November 1st and on January 10th at 11 o'clock. If you'd like to improve your relationship with your dog, learning their language, this presentation is for you. It'll be held at Waters Moss. Pre-registration is required, and you go to www.como.gov/parks-and-recreation and just follow the links to the leisure times, and the registration information will be there. So when we talk about reinforcers, what we're talking about is something that the dog will work for to the exclusion of everything else. Most of the time when we're training in a class situation, or when we're doing what I call formal training, which is setting aside time to work on a specific behavior, we use food because every dog is motivated to some degree by food. Just like my kids, you do your chores and we'll have ice cream afterwards or something like that. So it can be very motivating. But the problem is, if it's not something they want, or maybe they find something else more reinforcing, that food is not going to work. So when we talk about reinforcers, as I said before, it's anything the dog will work for to the exclusion of any distractions. This is a gross oversimplification, but for our purposes, this works. So a good example is Duncan, who I've mentioned before. He was crazy about tennis balls. My wife called it his crack. He had had a broken leg, and he had pins in his leg when we first got him, and so we had to minimize his activity level. When he got those pins out, took him out into the backyard, I showed him a tennis ball. He was like, yeah, okay. And I threw it across the yard, and he got this look on his face that I can only interpret as, oh my God, that's the greatest thing I've ever seen. He ran, got that tennis ball, picked it up, brought it back, dropped it at my feet. I won't get in too much to the fact that I had to teach him how to retrieve, how to drop something for me later, but that first time, he was just off. The tennis balls were his highest motivator. So when I would work with him, when it was appropriate, I would use tennis balls in the training. Now, if, for example, I was working on a sit-stay or something like that, wasn't very practical, because the reward is, oh, we get to play with the tennis ball. And I didn't want him getting so amped up and involved in that tennis ball that I couldn't get his attention back on me and the food rewards or reinforcers that I was using. So use what the dog finds motivating. The downside to that is, a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but sometimes dogs are very finicky, and so they may not like the $20 for a 6-ounce bag of treats. They prefer hot dogs, are very popular with a lot of dogs I work with. Pieces of cheese that, you can, $8 will buy you practically a gross or a bushel, or I don't know, some large amount of weight measurement. So you want to use what is reinforcing to the dog. You can't decide what's going to be reinforcing for them. So the dog in my intro, we had been working for, I think, 3 weeks trying to find something that motivated this dog. He was totally distracted. He wasn't running off and going nuts with the other dogs or anything like that. He was staying close to to the handler, to the client, but we couldn't find something that would get his attention onto the person so that they could ask him for the sits and the downs and the stuff that we were working with or working on. And, I told them, I said, well, plan on spending a little bit of money. Try hot dogs, try cheese, try the $20 a bag treats, anything you can think of. It's going to take a little bit of money, but, also I recommend squeaky toys and tennis balls and just different toys, anything this dog was going to find reinforcing. And so, like I said, it took us about 3 weeks, and then the client came in one evening and they said, I found out what's reinforcing this dog, and I can't remember his name, but I asked them, so what is it? And they said, praise. And sure enough, every time we asked the dog to do something, pet, scratch on the neck, oh, what a goodie, what a goodie, that dog would do anything. I don't want to say they graduated top of the class, but it's been probably 10, 12 years ago since I worked with this dog, but I still remember it. And I do remember that the dog did really, really well in class. So it's just a matter of working with the dog, find out what the dog finds reinforcing, and using that to your advantage. Okay. Now, the other side of that is when we use punishment, there's a lot of problems and a lot of fallout that can come with that. So one of them is if you punish a dog, let's say you're smacking the dog on the rump like I did with Talbot, I talked about I think it was the first episode. And this is in no way condoning this behavior, but just as an example, you want to do that so they stop the behavior, but not so hard that it hurts them. Okay, and the problem is when you're trying to find that happy medium, and I use air quotes there for happy, but when you try and find that happy medium, one of the potentials is the dog will get acclimated because you don't hit them hard enough, it doesn't make an impact, and so the next time you hit them harder and harder, and the dog is just slowly getting acclimated to being smacked on the rump until you get to the point where you do physical harm to the dog. One of the other problems with punishment is, particularly if the dog is being punished for, how do I want to say, if they are being punished on a regular basis, and when I say punishment, I mean positive punishment. Something is added, in this case physical. If the dog is positively punished, they are only going to give you enough behavior so that they don't get punished. That is the other part of it. If you're using positive reinforcement where you're adding the treat or the toy, whatever it is they find motivating, when you ask them to do something, they're going to do that behavior, they're going to do it faster, they're going to hold it longer, and you're just going to get better behaviors out of it. So the first management job I had, my brother and I actually worked at the same place. He was already in a parallel or equal position, and I got promoted to the crew chief position also, and we were talking, we shared a place at the time, we would drive to and from work together a lot of times, and we were talking about it, and one of the things he said to me that has always stuck with me is, when I ask my guys to do something, I want them to do it not because they feel they have to, but because they want to. And one of the things I learned taking psychology courses is psychology is the same across species. So I took that and I've applied it to my dog training. When I ask a dog to do something, I want them to do it because they want to, not because they feel they have to. I want them to make that decision to do it, and I want them to do it well. So if you think about one of the examples I heard a long time ago, and I would give credit if I could remember who it was, but I can't, so apologies there. But suppose you're taking a typing class. Every time you hit a wrong key, teacher raps you on the knuckles. Is that going to make you type faster? Is that going to make you take more chances, or is that going to slow you down so you're thinking about it more and being more precise? Now, you still get the behavior, but it may take you, I don't know, just 2 days to write a one-page paper because you were going so slow. Whereas if they're like, oh, well, you did these other things right, keep practicing, here's how you can practice that behavior so you can get faster, then you're probably going to get faster. Okay. Another good example, particularly with punishment, is, and again, I wish I could give credit for this, but you get into a taxi in a city you don't know, and you tell the driver, I don't want to go to the museum, I don't want to go to the park, I don't want to go to the hotel, I don't want to go to, I don't know, the theater. So is the taxi driver just supposed to drive you around, not to those places? It's the same thing with punishment and these behaviors. If you're constantly punishing the behavior, you're not giving the dog an option or letting them know what they're supposed to do. So you may suppress the behavior, but you're not going to give them an option. So a good example, I get this every once in a while. You have the dog chewing on a coffee table leg. You punish the dog, you stop the behavior. So what does the dog do? Well, they go and they start chewing on the cabinets, the corners of the cabinets. Okay, the reason the dog is doing that, the reason the dog is doing a behavior is because they're getting something out of it. So in this instance, particularly puppies, they go through 3 chewing stages. They lose their teeth, that's a chewing stage. They get their adult teeth, that's a chewing stage. And then their molars set, that's another chewing stage. So if we are not meeting that need, they're going to find a way to do it. And they may stop chewing on the coffee table leg, but then they go to the, the dresser or the cabinet corners or door jambs or something like that. So we have to give them those alternatives also. So in the chewing, for example, what I usually recommend is interrupt the behavior. This may be another episode, but I use the word no. And that doesn't mean don't do that, you're about to be punished. For my dogs, I've taught them no means stop what you're doing, I'm going to give you something else to do. And we could talk about behavior interrupters later. But so I stop the behavior, but then I redirect them to something appropriate. So we want to meet that need. So for example, again, another client that I had, she comes in, oh my gosh, my dog's chewing my coffee table leg, what do I do? It's like, well, does the dog have toys that are appropriate? She says, well, yeah, I've got stuffed toy and I've got a squeaky toy and I've got, I don't know, one of these, you've probably seen these toys that don't have any stuffing in them, it's just the fabric, stuff like that. I told her that's not hard enough. Okay, you need something that is comparable to that coffee table leg. I know there are lots of chew toys on the market. There are, I don't know, horns that you can get. The pet store that I go to, they've got an end cap full of different types of horns, something that is similar to that coffee table leg. So I recommended this to her. Do the class, everybody goes home. Next week we come back and she walks in and I asked her, so how's the chewing going on the coffee table leg? And she says, you know what, it's 90%, 95% better. Another good example is jumping up. This is one of the first things I teach when I'm talking about problem behaviors, and I may do an episode on problem behaviors in general, just stuff I'm commonly asked about. But for jumping up, dogs are very social. They want attention. They want to interact with us. And so that jumping up is what we call attention-seeking behavior. They are seeking attention. We want to give them that attention, but only when they ask for it appropriately. You hear this, knee the dog in the chest, step on the leash, something like that. And so, one, you run the risk of doing some type of physical harm to the dog, but the other thing is, you don't teach the dog what is expected. So what I recommend, something I've come up with, is dog jumps up on you, you take a step back, or before they jump up on you ideally, but you take a step back so they have nothing to lean against. So you've taken yourself away. And then as soon as the feet hit the floor, I put a word with it. I use the word off. Some people use the word down. You just want to be careful you're not using down for a lie down also. But off means all 4 feet on the floor. Now, I don't care if they're standing, sitting, laying down. I just want a well-behaved companion, so I'm not looking for anything specific. But you could add a sit or something if that's what you would prefer instead. Once all 4 feet are on the floor, then I give the dog the attention that they're asking for. And so later, when the dog comes up to me and stands there and looks at me, I respond to that. I give them that attention that they're looking for. Lots of pets, and if I have time I'll play with them, whatever. So we want to make sure we're giving them an appropriate alternative, so something that is going to meet that need. My notes are very scattered on this topic, so I'm trying to think where I wanted to go with that. So, these will get better as we go along. And so one of the things I hear a lot of times about punishment, and talking about people here as opposed to dogs, but yeah, I have never hit my kids. I've never laid a violent hand on them. And when I talk to people about this, or it comes up on social media, something like that, I always have people that are saying, well, I got spanked and I turned out just fine. The problem is you cannot know that. What would have happened if you had not been spanked, if instead, like our girls, we make the punishment fit the crime? So we may have them write a paper on why stealing or lying is bad. We may make them return an item if they took it without asking, and apologize. Something like this. That is going to make a bigger impact, and it is going to teach them the behavior that we want. Doesn't mean when they get, in their 30s and have a job, it's like, oh, I told a fellow employee to screw off, now I need to write a paper. But hopefully they'll know that they should go and apologize if it ever comes to something like that. It goes back to what I was saying. The punishment is only going to suppress the behavior, but it doesn't tell what is expected. Something else, this kind of falls into the same category, and I'm not going to get into all the specifics. This was for a neuroscience class that I took for my psychology degree. There, every once in a while, you'll see on social media this quote that goes around. So scientists have recently determined that it takes approximately 400 repetitions to create a new synapse in the brain, unless it is done with play, in which case it takes between 10 and 20 repetitions. The problem with that is it's wrong. And for this paper, I tried to get a hold of the person that said it. Unfortunately, right after she said it, her name is Karen Purvis, right after she said it, she passed away, or shortly after. And so I got a hold with Texas Christian University, which is where she worked, and where she did her research, and they said, yes, she did say it, but we do not know the context. We don't know if it's something she was working on, if it's a hypothesis she had, what the deal was. And there's no evidence to support it. What we do find is that any type of arousal, whether good or bad, positive or negative, and I mean that in the good or bad sense, but any arousal, if you learn something right after that, it is more likely to stick with you than if there is not any arousal. So I try to think of a good example for this, and maybe I'll come up with one later, but I go on to argue in the paper that any arousal will help the learning process, but we have a moral and ethical obligation for it to be enjoyable. So I'd rather use play than something punitive. And the reason being, go back to that, if it's punitive, we're only going to get enough behavior so that they don't get punished. Whereas if it's enjoyable, they're going to do it better, they're going to do it faster, they're going to enjoy it more. And I don't know about you, dear listener, but I don't want to be in constant conflict with my kids, my wife, the guys that work for me in my department. I don't want that conflict there. So why wouldn't I use something that they enjoy, or at least don't mind, as opposed to, you've got to do this, and if you don't, you're going to get fired, you're going to get spanked, whatever. This is one of those topics that I could spend 2-3 days talking about and still not cover it all. There's so much research that backs up what I'm saying, and if you're interested, you can certainly get in touch with me and I can point you in the direction of some of this research. If you're that kind of person that, like me, you like to read research studies and stuff like that. So thank you for joining me again. If you have any comments, questions, things you'd like to hear me talk about, you leave a comment, email me at bishopsgatetraining, all one word, @gmail.com. And we'll see you next time.
I come home late, tracking mud on the floor. He can't